Chapter 7. The two reconciled immediately and had dinner together. Although Liusu was a little warmer to him on the surface, she was worried in her heart. He made her jealous because he was just using provocation to force her to automatically throw herself into his arms. She had been dissatisfied with him a long time ago, and she was dissatisfied with him later. She chose this moment to get along with him, sacrificing herself in vain. He must not be grateful. He just thought that she had fallen into his trap. She would never dream of him marrying her. It's obvious that he wants her, but he doesn't want to marry her. However, even though her family was poor, it was still a prominent family, and everyone was on the scene, so he could not bear the charge of seduction. So he took that aboveboard approach. She knew now that it was a complete lie. He tries to shirk responsibility at every turn. If she was abandoned in the future, she would have absolutely no one to complain to. When Liusu thought of this, he gritted his teeth and let out a sigh of hatred. On the face of it, I still dealt with him as usual. Mrs. Su has rented a house in Happy Valley and is about to move there. Liusu wanted to follow her, but felt that she had disturbed her for more than a month in vain and felt embarrassed to have to stay longer. It wouldn't be a problem if the stalemate continued like this. In a dilemma, I hesitated. On this day, in the middle of the night, she had been in bed for a long time, just tossing and turning, and finally felt hazy for a while, when the phone on the bedside suddenly rang loudly. When she heard it, it was Liuyuan's voice, saying, "I love you," and hung up. Liusu's heart was beating loudly. He held the earphones and hesitated for a while, then gently put them back to their original place. But when he put them on, the ringing started ringing again. She picked up the receiver again, and Liuyuan asked there, "I forgot to ask you, do you love me?" Liusu coughed before speaking again, but his throat was still hoarse. She whispered, "You should have known a long time ago. Why did I come to Hong Kong?" Liuyuan sighed. "I knew it a long time ago, but it is obvious that it is a fact, and I just don't want to believe it." "Liusu, you don't love me," Liusu Liuyuan said. "How come I don't understand?" Liuyuan remained silent for a long time before saying, "There is a poem in the book of songs." Liusu said hurriedly, "I don't understand this." Liuyuan said impatiently, "I know you don't understand. If you understand, there's no need for me to explain it. I'm telling you to listen. The bond between life and death is broad. Be happy with your son, hold your hand, and grow old together with your son. My Chinese is not good at all, but I don't know if the explanation is correct. I think that is the saddest poem. Life, death and separation are all major events that are not under our control compared with the power of the outside world. We are so small, but we insist on saying, 'I will always be with you together. Let us never leave each other for the rest of our lives,' as if we were the masters of it ourselves." Liusu pondered for a long time, and couldn't help but get annoyed and said, "You could just say you don't want to get married. Otherwise it would be over, and you would have to go through a big detour. And you can't be the master of anything? Even a conservative family like me still says, when you first marry, you obey the mother. Marry again. You are such a free-spirited person. If you can't make the decision yourself, who will make the decision for you?" Liuyuan said coldly, "If you don't love me, what can you do? Can you make the decision?" Liusu said, "If you really love me, can you still care about this?" Liuyuan said, "I'm not that confused. I don't have to spend money to marry someone who has no feelings for me to control me. That's too unfair. For you that's not fair. Oh, maybe you don't care. You basically think that marriage is long-term prostitution." Liusu didn't wait for him to finish, and slapped the earphones down. His face flushed with anger. He dared to insult her like this. He dared. She sat on the bed, the hot darkness wrapping her in a grape purple velvet blanket. She was covered in sweat and itchy, and the hair tips on her neck and back were irritated and uncomfortable. She pressed her hands on her cheeks, but her palms were cold. The bell rang again. She didn't answer the phone and let it ring. Lingling, lingling. The sound was extremely deafening. In the silent room, in the silent hotel, in the silent Repulse Bay, Liusu suddenly realized that she could not wake up the entire Repulse Bay Hotel. First, Mrs. Su is next door. She gingerly picked up the receiver and put it on the mattress, but the surroundings were too quiet. Even though they were so far away, she could still hear Liuyuan's voice saying calmly, "Liusu, can you see the moon in your window?" Liusu didn't know why, but suddenly choked up. The moon in the tearful eyes was large and blurry, silvery, with green edges. Liuyuan said, "On my side, there is a wisteria hanging above the window, blocking half of it. It is a rose, maybe not." He stopped talking, but the phone never hung up. For a long time, Liusu suspected that he had fallen asleep, but he finally made a sound and hung up gently. Liusu picked up her receiver from the sheets with trembling hands and put it back on the shelf. She was afraid that he would call a fourth time, but he didn't. "This is all a dream. The more I think about it, the more it looks like a dream." She didn't dare to ask him the next morning, because he would definitely laugh at her. Dreams are thoughts from the heart. She missed him so desperately that he would even call and say "I love you" in her sleep. His attitude was no different from usual. They went out for a day as usual. Liusu suddenly realized that there were many people who thought they were a couple: the servants and the old ladies who chatted with her in the hotel. It was not their fault for misunderstanding. Liuyuan lived next door to her, always walking side by side when going in and out, and even went for walks on the coast late at night, not avoiding suspicion at all. A nanny pushed a child's car past, nodded to Liusu, and called Mrs. Fan. Liusu's face froze, neither smiling nor smiling, so he could only frown and glance at Liuyuan. Whispering, said, "They don't know what they are thinking." Liuyuan said with a smile, "The people who call you Mrs. Fan, don't worry about them. The people who call you Miss Bai, I don't know what they think." Tassel changed color. Liuyuan stroked his chin with his hand and said with a smile, "Don't bear this false reputation in vain." Liusu looked at him in surprise, suddenly realizing how vicious he was. He deliberately acted affectionate in front of others so that she could not prove that they had not had a relationship. She was riding a tiger, unable to return to her hometown, unable to see her parents, and had no other option except to be his mistress. However, if she gives in to him, not only will all her previous efforts be wasted, but she will also be doomed in the future. She doesn't, even if she was in vain. He just took advantage of her verbally. After all, he still didn't get her. Since he didn't get her, maybe he would come back to her one day and bring better peace terms. She made up her mind and told Liuyuan that she planned to go back to Shanghai, but Liuyuan did not insist on staying and volunteered to send her back. Liusu said, "That's not necessary. Aren't you going to Singapore?" Liuyuan said, "It's already postponed anyway, so it won't matter if we postpone it for a while. There are also things waiting to be taken care of in Shanghai." Liusu knew that he still wanted to go to Singapore. It's a consistent policy, lest everyone stop talking about the two of them. The more conclusive and evidence-based everyone's claims are, the more indefensible Liusu is, and naturally he cannot find a place in Shanghai. Liusu figured that even if he didn't send her back, nothing would be hidden from her family. She was willing to risk everything, so she let him give her a ride. Mrs. Su was surprised when she saw that the two of them were fighting fiercely and suddenly wanted to separate. She asked Liusu and Liuyuan. Although the two of them said they wanted to protect each other in unison, how could Mrs. Su believe it? On the boat, they had many opportunities to get close, but Yanagihara could resist the moonlight on the deck just as he could resist the moonlight in Repulse Bay. He never had a solid word to say to her. His attitude was a bit indifferent, but Liusu could see that his leisure was a kind of complacent leisure. He held her firmly and she couldn't jump out of his palm. When he arrived in Shanghai, he sent her home without getting out of the car. There were already reports from Bai Mansion that Miss Six was living together with Fan Liuyuan in Hong Kong. Now she has been playing with them for more than a month. And then she comes back as if nothing happened, clearly intending to embarrass the Bai family. Liusu hooked up with Fan Liuyuan just for his money. If you really get the money, you won't come home silently. Obviously, you won't get any benefits from him. Originally, a woman should die if she is cheated by a man. If a woman is cheated by a man, she is even more of an adulterer. If a woman tries to cheat a man but fails, and instead falls for someone else's cheat, that is a double act. She was so lewd and evil that even if she killed her, she would also stain the knife. Usually in Bai Mansion, if anyone makes a big mistake, everyone will explode. When encountering a truly shocking treachery, the grandparents were so excited that they ate mugwort and were speechless for a moment. Everyone first agreed the family scandal must not be publicized. And then they went separately to tell relatives and friends, forcing them to swear to keep the secret. Then I asked my relatives and friends one by one to see if they knew and how much they knew. In the end, everyone felt that they couldn't hide it anymore. So they simply opened up the skylight and spoke frankly, patting their legs and sighing with emotion. They had been busy with these procedures all autumn, so they had been slow to take decisive action against Liusu. Liusu didn't know that her return this time would be even worse than before. She had long since severed all ties with this family. She didn't want to go out to find a small job and mess around with a bowl of rice. No matter how miserable it is better than being miserable at home. But after finding a lowly career, she lost her status as a lady. That identity is tasteless to eat and a pity to discard. Especially now, she has not despaired of Fan Liuyuan. She cannot devalue herself first, otherwise he will have more excuses to refuse to marry her. So she had to endure it for a while anyway. Chapter 8. By the end of November, Fan Liuyuan received a telegram from Hong Kong. The telegram was circulated to everyone in the Bai Mansion. The old lady just called Liusu over and handed it to her. There were only a few words, begging to come to Hong Kong. The ticket has been processed by Travelex. Old Mrs. Bai sighed and said, "Since I asked you to go, you just go." Is she so mean? Tears fell from her eyes. As she cried, she suddenly lost her self-control and found that she couldn't bear it anymore. In one autumn, she has aged to years cannot bear to grow old. So I left home for the second time and came to Hong Kong. On this trip, she had already lost the feeling of the pleasant adventure she had last time, and she failed. Of course, everyone likes to be surrendered, but that is only within a certain range. If she was purely conquered by Fan Liuyuan's grace and charm, that would be another story, but it was also mixed with family pressure, the most painful ingredient. Fan Liuyuan greeted her on the pier in the drizzle. He said that her green glass raincoat looked like a bottle, and added, "medicine bottle." She thought he was mocking her weakness, but he added another sentence, "You are the medicine that heals me." She blushed and rolled her eyes at him. He reserved the original room for her. That night, it was already 2 o'clock when she came back to the room. She was putting on her evening makeup in the bathroom, turned off the light, and came out. She just remembered that the light switch in her room was installed on the bedside, so she had to come over in the dark. Stepped on a leather shoe on the floor, and almost fell over. Hand in hand, I blame myself for being negligent and not putting away my shoes. Suddenly someone on the bed laughed and said, "Don't be scared, they're my shoes." Liusu paused for a while and asked, "What are you doing here?" Liuyuan said, "I've always wanted to see the moon from your window. You can see it more clearly from this side of the house than from that side." The phone call that night was indeed from him. It was not a dream. He loves her. This vicious person. He loves her, but he only treats her like this. She couldn't help but feel chilled, turned around and walked to the dressing table. The slender moon at the end of November is just white, like frost flowers on the glass window. However, there is a hint of moonlight on the sea, and when it is reflected in the window, the thin light illuminates the mirror. Liusu slowly took off her hairnet, stirred up her hair, and the fork fell to the ground with a clang. She put on the net again, held the tip of the hairnet tightly in her mouth, whereupon her eyebrows squatted down and picked up the forks one by one. Liuyuan had already walked behind her with bare feet, put a hand on her head, turned her face upside down, and kissed her mouth. The hairnet slipped to the ground. This was the first time he kissed her, but both of them wondered. If it wasn't the first time since it had happened countless times in their fantasies, they had had many opportunities in the past, the right environment, the right mood. He had thought about it, and she had considered the possibility. However, both sides are very good people. They planned to carefully and never make any mistakes. Now this suddenly became true, and both of them were confused. Liusu felt her body slip away in a circle and fall on the mirror, her vest pressed tightly against the cold mirror. His mouth never left hers. He also pushed her towards the mirror, and they seemed to have fallen into the mirror, into another dim world. It was cold and hot, and wild sparks burned her upper body. The next day he told her that he was going to England in a week. She asked him to take her with him, but he replied that that was impossible. He proposed to rent a house for her to live in Hong Kong, and after a year and a half, he would come back if she wants to live in Shanghai. That's up to her. Of course, she refused to go back to Shanghai. Those people at home, the farther away from them the better. Staying alone in Hong Kong will make you feel lonely. The question is whether the situation has changed when he comes back. That's all up to him. Can a week of love hold his heart? But on the other hand, Liuyuan is a person with no personality. He has no chance to get tired of getting together and breaking up in such a hurry. And it is not in her favor to not start. A week is often more memorable than a year. If he really comes back to her with passionate memories, she may have changed. Women in their late 30s are often unusually delicate and look haggard in the blink of an eye. In short, it is difficult, painful, almost impossible to hold on to a man for a long time without the protection of marriage. Never mind it. She admits that Liuyuan is cute and he gives her wonderful stimulation. But her purpose with him is financial security. Of this, she knew she could rest assured. Together they looked at a house on Babington Road, located on a hillside. The house was painted and a Cantonese maid named Ollie was hired. After purchasing only a few of the most important pieces of furniture, it was time for Liuyuan to leave. The rest was left to Liusu to pick up slowly. The barn had not yet been opened at home on that winter evening. When Liusu sent him aboard, he ate some sandwiches in the dining room on the ship. Liusu was filled with dissatisfaction, so she drank a few more glasses of wine and was blown away by the sea breeze. When she came back, she was very drunk. When she got home, Ollie boiled water in the kitchen to wash the feet of the child she was taking with her. Liusu looked around and turned on the lights here and there. The green paint on the doors and windows in the living room was not dry yet. She touched it with her index finger and then put her sticky fingertips on the wall, leaving green marks on each one. Why not? Isn't this illegal? This is her home. She smiled and simply put a bright green handprint on the dandelion wall. She staggered to the next room. Empty rooms, one after another. An empty world. She felt like she could fly to the ceiling. She walked on the empty floor as if on a dust-free ceiling. The room was too empty and she couldn't fill it without lighting. The light was still not enough, and she would have to remember to replace it with some stronger light bulbs tomorrow. She went up the stairs. It was so empty, and she desperately needed absolute silence. She was very tired, and it was too difficult to please Liuyuan. He had always had a weird temper. For her, because he had real feelings for her, he became even weirder and unhappy. It would be better if he left, letting her breathe a sigh of relief. Now she doesn't want anyone, hateful people, lovely people. She doesn't want them at all. Ever since she was a child, her world had felt too crowded. Pushing, squeezing, stepping on, holding, carrying, old and young, they are all human beings, a family of about 20 lives in a shared house. You can cut your nails in the house while someone is watching from the window. It was so easy to fly far away and reach the sun-inhabited land. If she officially becomes Mrs. Fan, she will have all kinds of responsibilities and she can't live without people. Now she is just Fan Liuyuan's mistress, faceless. She should avoid people, and people should avoid her. It was quiet, but it was a pity that she had no other interests besides people. With her little knowledge and ability, she can be a virtuous daughter-in-law and an attentive mother. Here she is useless as a hero. Just take care of the house. There is no way to take care of the house. Just take care of the children. Liuyuan doesn't want children at all. As long as she lives frugally, she doesn't have to worry about money at all. How will she spend the next few years? Go in to play cards with Mrs. Su or watch a show. Then gradually, she started sleeping with actors, smoking opium, and go in the way of concubines. She suddenly stopped, holding out her chest and twisting her hands tightly behind her back. That's not the case. She's not a nasty person. She can control herself, but Can she control herself from going crazy? The 3 rooms in the Pinsy style upstairs and the 3 rooms in the Pinsy style downstairs are all decorated with lights. The newly waxed floor shines brightly. No one was round. Room after room, shouting emptiness. Liusu lay down on the bed and wanted to go down and turn off the light, but couldn't move. Later, she heard Ollie dragging his clogs up the stairs, fluttering and turning off the lights, and her tense nerves gradually relaxed. That day was December 7, 1941. On December 8, the cannon sounded. With one shot after another, the silver mist of the winter morning gradually dispersed on the mountaintops and in the valleys. Residents of the entire island looked towards the sea and said, "The war has begun. The war has begun." No one could believe it. But after all, the war was on. Liusu stayed alone in Babington Road, not knowing anything. By the time Ollie found out the news from the neighbors and hurriedly woke her up, a fierce war was already underway outside. There is a scientific laboratory near Babington Road. There is an anti-aircraft gun on the roof. Stray bullets keep flying over, making a long and sharp cry, "Goya," and then bang, falling to the ground. The sound of squeaking, tore through the air and tore apart the nerves. The light blue sky was torn into strips, fluttering in the cold wind. Countless severed nerve tips were floating in the wind at the same time. Chapter 9. Liusu's house is empty, and his heart is empty. There is no rice at home, so his stomach is also empty. It came out of nowhere, so she felt the terrifying attack particularly intensely. I called Zoo's house in Happy Valley, but couldn't get through for a long time, because no one with a phone in the city was calling to ask which area was safer and to make an evacuation plan. Liusu only connected the phone in the afternoon, but even though the phone was ringing, no one came to answer the call. Mr. Zhu and Mrs. Zhu must have left and moved to a safer area. Liusu ran out of ideas, but the artillery fire gradually became more intense. The nearby anti-aircraft guns became the focus of the aircraft's attention. The plane was circling overhead. ZZZ, going around in a circle and back again. ZZ, painfully. Like a dentist's spiral appliance, digging straight into the depths of the soul. Ollie was sitting on the threshold of the living room holding her crying child. She seemed to be in a coma, swaying from side to side, murmuring songs, and coaxing and patting the child. There was another squeak, ADH, outside the window, and a corner of the eaves was cut off with a bang, and sand and gravel fell down. Ollie screamed, jumped up, hugged the child and ran out. Liusu caught up with her at the gate, grabbed her and asked, "Where are you going?" Ollie said, "You can't get in here." I'll take her to the gutter to hide." Liusu said, "You're crazy. Go and die." Ollie said repeatedly, "Let me go. This child of mine, the only one, can't die. Hide in the gutter." Liusu held on with all his strength. He hit her, Ollie pushed her, she fell, and Ollie rushed out the door. At this moment, there was a loud bang, and the whole world went dark, like a huge box, the lid of which was slammed shut. Countless Luocha she hates are all locked up inside. Liusu only thought that he was dead, but who knew he was still alive? When I opened my eyes, I saw glass shards and sun shadows all over the ground. She struggled to get up and went to find Ollie. Ollie hugged the child tightly, lowered his head, and pressed his forehead against the cement wall in the doorway. He was shocked and confused. Liusu pulled her in and heard the noise outside that a bomb had dropped next door and a big crater had been blown up in the garden. This time there was a loud noise, and the lid of the box was closed. But there was still no silence. The banging continued, as if hammering nails on the lid of the box, pounding endlessly, from dawn to dusk, and from dusk to dawn. Liusu also thought of Liuyuan, wondering whether his ship had sailed out of the port or been sunk. But when she thought of him, she felt a little lost, as if she was a lifetime away. The current part has nothing to do with her past. It's like a radio song. Halfway through the song, it suddenly exploded due to the bad weather. After the explosion, the song still has to be sung. I'm just afraid that when the explosion is over and the song has been sung, there will be no need to listen to it. The next day, Liusu, Ollie and her mother ate several biscuits in the jar separately. and their spirits gradually weakened. Every fragment of the whizzing bullet was like an ear scraper hitting her face. A military truck rumbled down the street and unexpectedly stopped in front of the door. When the bell rang, Liusu went to open the door. When she saw it was Liuan, she grabbed his hand and hugged his arm tightly, like Ollie hugging a child. The man jumped forward and knocked his head on the cement wall in the doorway. Liuan held her head with his other hand and said hurriedly, "Are you frightened? Don't worry, don't worry. You go pack some useful things, and we'll go to Repulse Bay. Hurry, hurry." Liusu stumbled and rushed in, asking, "Isn't it okay to go to Repulse Bay?" Liuan said, "They said they wouldn't land there. And the food in the hotel is always no problem. They have a rich collection." Liusu said, "Your ship." Liuan said, "The ship didn't leave. They sent the first-class passengers to the Repulse Bay Hotel. They were supposed to pick you up yesterday, but they couldn't get a car, and the bus didn't leave. I can't squeeze in. I finally managed to get this truck today." Liusu couldn't make up his mind to pack his luggage and packed a small package at random. Liuan gave Ollie 2 months' wages and asked her to look after the house. The two of them got into the car and lay face down side by side in the cargo compartment covered with a yellow-green oilcloth awning. They bumped along the way, bending their elbows and knees. The skin on it is all worn out. Liuan sighed. "This explosion has broken the tail of so many stories." Liusu was also sad, and after a while he said, "If you are killed by the explosion, my story will be over. If you are killed by the explosion, your story will still be long?" Liuan laughed and said, "Are you going to keep the holiday for me?" Both of them were a little crazy, and they laughed in unison for no reason, and he couldn't stop laughing. After laughing, I was trembling all over. The truck arrived at Repulse Bay in a net of squeaky stray bullets. There are troops stationed downstairs in the Repulse Bay Hotel, and they still live in the old rooms upstairs. After we settled in, we discovered that although the hotel had plenty of storage, it was all reserved for the soldiers. In addition to canned milk, beef and mutton, and fruits, there are also sacks of white bread and bran bread. The guests were given only to soda crackers or to sugar cubes for each meal, and everyone was dying of hunger. Repulse Bay was relatively calm for the first 2 days, but then the situation suddenly changed and gradually became heated. There was no shelter upstairs and no one could find shelter. They all came downstairs and stood guard in the canteen. The glass door of the canteen was wide open and sandbags were piled in front of the door. The British soldiers set up cannons there to fire outside. The warships in the bay pinpointed the source of the shells and returned the salute one by one. Across the palm trees and the fountain, bullets flew back and forth. Liuan and Liusu followed everyone and pressed their backs against the wall of the hall. The dark background is like an ancient Persian carpet, woven with various characters, including lords, princesses, talented men, and beauties. The blanket was hung on a bamboo pole, and the dust on it was beaten against the wind. It was beaten hard, and the people on it were beaten until they had no way out. When the cannon shot this way, they ran to that side. When the cannon shot that way, they ran to this side. Eventually, hundreds of holes were drilled into an open hole, and one wall collapsed. There was no way to escape, so I had to sit down on the floor and resign myself to fate. When Liusu reached this point, she regretted that Liuan was by her side. She seemed to have 2 bodies, and she was in double danger. If a bullet could not hit her, it might hit him. If he died or became disabled, her situation would be even more unimaginable. If she was injured, she would have no choice but to die for fear of dragging him down. Even if he died, he would not die cleanly and alone. She expected Liuan to think so too. She didn't know anything else. At this moment, she only had him, and he only had her. There was a truce. The men and women trapped in the Repulse Bay Hotel slowly walked towards the city. After passing the lowest cliff, the red clay cliff, and the red clay cliff, and the lowest cliff again, I almost suspected that I had gone the wrong way, so I went back. But no, there was no such exploding pit on the previous road, full of stones. Liuan and Liusu rarely spoke. They used to have a few words while riding in the car, but now they have walked dozens of miles on the road and have nothing to say. Occasionally, if there is a sentence, halfway through the sentence, the other party will usually know what is going on. And there is no need to say anything further, Liuyuan said. Look, it's on the beach. Liusu said. Yes, the beach is covered with barbed wire fences that are split horizontally and vertically. Outside the barbed wire fence, the pale white seawater is spitting with light yellow sand. Sunny days in winter are also in different blue. The season of wild sparkles is over, Liusu said. That wall. Liuyuan said. I didn't even go take a look. Liusu sighed and said. Forget it. Liuyuan became hotter after walking, took off his coat and put it on his arms. I was sweating too. Liusu said. You are afraid of the heat. Let me hold it for you. In the past, Liuyuan would never have refused, but now he is not so gentlemanly and actually handed it to her. After walking for a while, the mountain gradually got higher. I don't know whether it was the wind blowing the trees or the drifting cloud shadows, but the green and yellow foothills slowly darkened. When you look closely, it's not the wind or the clouds. It's the sun slowly moving over the mountains, half of the foothills buried in a huge blue shadow. There were several houses burning on the mountain, and the sun was shining bright light. Shade of the mountain was white, and the shade of the mountain was black, but the sun just moved slowly over the top of the mountain. Chapter 10. When I got home, I opened the ajar door and flapping my wings, a flock of pigeons flew out. The hall was filled with dust and pigeon droppings. When Liusu reached the top of the stairs, she couldn't help but exclaimed, "Oh!" On the second floor, her new boxes and cages lay crookedly with their mouths wide open. Two of them rolled down the stairs, and the latter feet were submerged in the silk and satin in the torrent. Liusu bent down and picked up a honey-colored velvet-lined cheongsam, but it was not her own. It was full of sweat, odor holes, and the smell of cheap perfume. She also found many strange women's supplies, broken magazines, and open cans of likies dripping with residual juice, mixed in a pile of her clothes. Have soldiers been stationed in this house? British soldiers with women. He seemed to have gone in a hurry. Most of the local poor who ransacked from house to house had never visited, otherwise they wouldn't have left all this behind. Liuyuan helped her call Ollie loudly. The last gray-backed pigeon pierced through the thorns and flew out through the yellow sunlight in the doorway. Ollie is missing, however. The owners of the house still have to live without her. They didn't have time to tidy up the house, so they went to get food first. They went through a lot of trouble and bought a bag of rice at a high price. Fortunately, the gas supply was not cut off, but the running water was not. Liuyuan took a lead bucket to the mountains to draw a bucket of spring water and started cooking. From now on, they will only be busy eating, drinking and cleaning the room every day. Liuyuan can do all kinds of menial tasks, such as sweeping and mopping the floor, and helping Tassel twist the heavy sheets. Liusu cooked on the stove for the first time, and it actually brought out the flavor of her hometown. Because Liuyuan couldn't forget Malay food, she also learned to make fried sandbags and curry fish. Although they felt unprecedented interest in food, they still tried their best to save money. Liuyuan didn't have much Hong Kong dollars with him, so once they got a ship, they had to find a way to get back to Shanghai. After all, living in Hong Kong after the disaster is not a long-term solution. I was so busy during the day and just got over it. At night, in that dead city, there are no lights, no human voices, only the vast cold wind. 3 different scales, oh ho, woo, endlessly calling. This break okay, that one gradually started ringing again. 3 parallel gray dragons flew forward in a straight line, their bodies extending indefinitely, with no tail visible. Oh, ha, woo. After calling out, even the blue dragon was gone. It was just a void of air, a bridge of vacuum, leading into the darkness, into the void of the void. Everything is finished here. The remaining ruins are broken and ruined. Civilized people who have lost their memory stumble around in the dusk, as if they are looking for something, but in fact everything is lost. Liusu sat surrounded by quilts and listened to the sad wind. She did know that the gray brick wall near Repulse Bay must still be standing there. The wind stopped, like 3 gray dragons, hanging on the wall, their silver scales shining in the moonlight. As if in a dream, she came to the foot of the wall again and came face to face with Liuyuan. She finally met Liuyuan. In this turbulent world, money, real estate, and everything that lasts forever are all unreliable. The only things she could rely on were the breath in her mouth and the person sleeping next to her. She suddenly crawled to Liuyuan and hugged him across his quilt. He reached out from under the covers and took her hand. They see each other transparently. It was just a moment of complete understanding, but this moment was enough for them to live together in harmony for 10 or 8 years. He is just a selfish man, and she is just a selfish woman. In this area of chaos and chaos, there is no place for individualists, but there is always room for an ordinary couple. One day, they were shopping for groceries on the street and met Princess Sahaisini. Sahaini had a sullen face and had her fluffy braids randomly braided into a bun. She wore a green cotton robe borrowed from somewhere, but she still wore Indian-style 7 treasure inlaid leather slippers at her feet. She shook hands with them warmly, asked them where they lived now, and was eager to see their new house. He also noticed that there were oysters with the shells removed from Liusu's basket, and was willing to learn how to make steamed oyster soup from Liusu. Liuyuan invited her to have a casual meal, and she happily went back with them. Her Englishman had gone to a concentration camp, and she was now living in the home of an Indian policeman whom she knew well and who often worked for her. She hadn't had enough to eat in a long time. She called Liusu Miss Bai. Liuyuan smiled and said, "This is my wife. You should say congratulations to me." Sahishini said, "Really? When did you get married?" Liuyuan shrugged and said, "Just there was an announcement in the China newspaper. You know, marriages during the war are always scrawled." Liusu didn't understand what they said. Sahaisini kissed him and kissed her. However, their food was very cold and bitter after all, and Yanagihara declared that it was rare for them to eat oyster soup. Sahaisini never came to the house again. They sent her out that day. Liusu stood on the threshold. Liuyuan stood behind her, put his palms on hers, and said with a smile, "I said, when will we get married?" Liusu listened without saying a word. Just he lowered his head and shed tears. Liuyuan took her hand and said, "Come on. Let's go to the newspaper office to publish the notice today. But you may be willing to wait a little longer until we return to Shanghai to make a big show and invite relatives." Liusu said, "Bah, they deserve it too." As he said that, he laughed out loud, fell back and leaned against him. Liuyuan stretched out his hand in front of her face and said, crying and laughing again. The two of them walked into the city together, and after walking round a roundabout, the road suddenly dropped, and in front of them, there was nothing but an ethereal sky, a lighting-colored, humid sky. A foreign porcelain signboard was picked out at the small iron gate and it read, "Zhao Zhangqing Dentist." The wind blew the iron hooks on the signboard squeaking, but behind the signboard was only the ethereal sky. Liuyuan stopped and looked for a long time, feeling the ordinary horror, suddenly shuddered, and said to Liusu, "Now you should believe life and death contract. Where did we have the final say? During the bombing." "What an accident," Liusu said angrily. "At this time, you still say that you can't make the decision." Liuyuan smiled and said, "I'm not giving up. What I mean is," he looked at her face and smiled. Liusu said, "No more, no more." They continued walking. Liuyuan said again, "By some strange coincidence, we really fell in love." Liusu said, "You said you loved me a long time ago." Liuyuan said with a smile, "That doesn't count. We were too busy falling in love at that time. How could we have time for love?" The wedding announcement was published in the newspaper, and Mr. Zhu and Mrs. Zhu rushed over to congratulate her. Liusu felt unhappy because they were moving to a safe place during the siege, and did not care about her life or death, but she could only greet them with a smile. Liuyuan organized a banquet and invited a guest. Soon, traffic between Hong Kong and Shanghai was restored, and they returned to Shanghai. Liusu only went back to the Bai mansion once, just for fear that people would talk too much and cause trouble. However, trouble is inevitable. The fourth grandma decides to divorce the fourth master, and everyone has Liusu behind her back. Liusu divorced and remarried, but she had such amazing achievements. No wonder others want to follow her example. Liusu squatted in the shadow of the lamp and lit mosquito incense. Thinking of fourth grandma, she smiled. Liuyuan never joked with her now. He saved his wisecracks for the other women. That was a good sign to be thankful for, and it meant that he completely regarded her as one of his own, a legitimate wife. However, Liusu was still a little confused. The fall of Hong Kong fulfilled her destiny. But in this unreasonable world, who knows what is cause and what is effect? Who knows? Maybe just because he wanted to fulfill her, a big city collapsed. Thousands of people died, thousands of people suffered, and earth-shattering reforms followed. Liusu didn't feel that her position in history was settled. She just stood up with a smile and kicked the mosquito incense tray under the table. Most of the people in the legend who conquered the country and conquered the city were like this. There are legends everywhere, but they don't necessarily have such a happy ending. The who can play dumbly, pulling it back and forth in the night, with thousands of lights, telling endless desolate stories, even if you don't ask.
Alright, this story has come to an end. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you.